The tribe expelled 2 Apache women for being widowed. The cowboy said, "Come with me." In one small hut, 2 women sat side by side, their hands clasped tightly together, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. Both had recently lost their husbands, men they had loved and depended on. The grief in their eyes was deep and unending, yet today there was a new shadow over their hearts. The elders of the village had decided that, according to their rules, these women could no longer live among them. The tradition of the tribe dictated that widows, no matter their age or how well they had cared for their families, could not remain. At first, the women could not believe what they were hearing. They had spent all their lives in this village, learned its ways, helped their families, and worked alongside others in the community. And yet, in a single moment, they were being told they must leave. The words of the elders were firm and final. One of the women, her face pale from sleepless nights, tried to plead, to explain that she could still contribute, that she still had life to live. But the elders shook their heads, their expressions unreadable. There was no room for compromise. The younger woman, barely 25, felt her knees go weak. She had been married for only a few years, and her husband had been kind, always encouraging her to pursue her small crafts and to learn from others in the tribe. He had been gone only a short time, taken by illness, and now she faced a second loss. The very community that had once been her home had turned her away. The older woman in her late 30s had raised 2 children and had managed the household for years. Her husband had died defending their village during a raid, and she had thought that loyalty and courage might protect her. But nothing could stop the decree. As the women gathered a few possessions, the rest of the village watched silently. Some avoided their gaze entirely, afraid of the tension that might arise if they looked directly. Others felt a pang of sorrow but said nothing, bound by the same traditions that condemned the women. The air was heavy with unspoken words, grief, and anger. The 2 women carried only what they could hold, small bundles wrapped in worn cloth, leaving behind their homes, their gardens, and memories etched into every corner. Stepping beyond the outskirts of the village, the world seemed suddenly larger, harsher, and more unforgiving. The wide plain stretched endlessly, dotted with scrubby bushes and the occasional towering cactus. The sky above was pale, almost too bright, and the wind carried the dry scent of the desert. Every sound, from the distant call of a bird to the rustle of dry grass, seemed magnified in the silence. For the first time in their lives, the women were truly alone, and the weight of that loneliness pressed down on them. They walked slowly, unsure of the direction, unsure of what lay ahead. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs and thirst made their throats dry and scratchy. At night, they huddled together beneath the cold sky, counting the stars, trying to find a sense of comfort in their beauty. But sleep was often difficult, interrupted by fear and the memories of the homes they had lost. They spoke little, for words felt insufficient in the face of such sorrow. Instead, they shared small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a comforting squeeze, a whispered hope that they would survive. As days passed, the women learned to move carefully across the harsh land. They searched for water in small streams, boiled what they found to make it safe, and foraged for roots and berries. They discovered that survival required attention to details they had never needed before. Following animal tracks, listening for the sound of distant water, and recognizing the signs of changing weather. Each day brought new challenges, and each challenge tested not only their physical strength but their mental endurance. The older woman often reflected on the unfairness of it all. She thought about the elders' words and wondered if tradition had always been this harsh, or if, over time, it had grown stricter. She questioned why widows were treated as outcasts when they had devoted their lives to their families and community. She felt a quiet anger rise within her, not toward her husband, not even toward the villagers who followed the rules, but at the invisible walls that tradition had built, separating kindness from survival, justice from sorrow. Meanwhile, the younger woman struggled with fear more than anger. She feared the vast unknown, feared wild animals and harsh weather, and feared the loneliness that pressed down like a heavy blanket at night. Yet, she also discovered a strength she had not known existed. Each small victory, finding a safe place to sleep, gathering enough food for a day, successfully lighting a fire, gave her a sense of pride. She realized that survival was no longer something her husband or anyone else could provide. It rested entirely in her own hands. One morning, as they rested beneath a sparse tree, a gentle breeze carried a sound unlike the wind or the animals. It was the distant echo of hooves on the hard ground. The women froze, uncertain whether it was a threat or merely another traveler passing through. Slowly they peered over the edge of the hill. A lone figure appeared, silhouetted against the morning sun, a cowboy riding a sturdy horse. His eyes scanned the land carefully, taking in the expanse around him, and when they landed on the two women, there was a flicker of curiosity. The older woman instinctively took a step back, gripping the younger woman's arm. She whispered, "We cannot trust strangers." But the younger woman, tired of fear and longing for some kind of help, looked at the cowboy with hope. There was something different in his posture, a calmness and confidence that suggested he was not a threat. The cowboy rode closer, tipping his hat respectfully and speaking in a low, steady voice. "Are you two lost?" he asked. The women hesitated. The older woman shook her head slowly, unsure of what to say. The younger woman stepped slightly forward. "Yes," she admitted, "we have nowhere to go." The cowboy nodded as if he had expected that answer and offered gently, "Then come with me. You can ride with me. I can help." The words felt like a lifeline, something solid in the shifting sands of their lives. Trust was not immediate, but after a long moment of silence, they realized they had little choice. They could continue to wander, facing hunger, thirst, and the unknown dangers of the plains, or they could take a chance with this stranger who offered them help. Carefully they approached, and the cowboy led them to his horse. As they mounted and began to ride, the wind brushing against their faces, the women felt a mix of fear and relief. They did not know what the future held, but for the first time since being expelled, they felt the faint stirrings of hope. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, full of danger and promise alike. And for the first time, they realized that life beyond the village, though uncertain, was still theirs to live. The morning sun had grown warmer, casting long shadows across the plains, as the cowboy guided the two women along a narrow dirt trail. The women, still cautious, held tightly onto the saddle horn, their eyes scanning the open land. The younger woman's heart raced with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She had never traveled so far from her village and had never been offered help by a stranger. Every sound, the distant crow of a bird, the whisper of the wind across the grass, the soft thud of hooves on dry earth, felt magnified. The cowboy spoke little at first, letting the quiet ease their tension. When he did speak, his voice was calm and reassuring, unlike anything they had heard from the elders or the villagers. "You don't have to worry," he said. "I've been through these lands many times. I know where to find water and shelter." The older woman, though still suspicious, allowed herself a small nod. She could see that he was skilled with horses and that his eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert to danger. There was something steady and dependable about him. As the hours passed, the cowboy led them toward a small stream that sparkled in the sunlight. Water was a rare gift in the open plains, and the women felt a quiet relief as they knelt to drink. The older woman cupped her hands, letting the cool liquid soothe her parched throat, while the younger woman watched the reflections in the water, seeing her own tired eyes staring back. For a brief moment, the world seemed less frightening, and they allowed themselves to imagine that life could be more than endless wandering. The cowboy set up a small camp near the stream, gathering firewood and arranging stones for a safe fire. He worked efficiently, silently observing the women as they adjusted to their new surroundings. "You'll need to rest," he said gently. "Traveling across the plains is harder than it seems. The days are long, the nights cold, and the land does not forgive mistakes." The women nodded, realizing that he was right. Even with guidance, survival was a challenge. As night fell, the sky filled with stars, bright and endless. The younger woman marveled at the vastness, so different from the confined spaces of her village. She whispered almost to herself, "I never imagined the sky could be so big." The older woman, sitting beside her, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, "but it reminds me how small we are and how careful we must be." The cowboy, sitting across the fire, watched the women with quiet interest, sensing their mixture of awe and fear. In the days that followed, he began to teach them basic survival skills. He showed them how to find edible plants, track animals, and recognize the signs of approaching weather. The older woman proved quick to learn, her experience managing her household in the village giving her a keen sense of observation. The younger woman struggled at first, often fumbling with simple tasks, but she persisted, driven by a determination to survive. Slowly they gained confidence in their ability to navigate the harsh world around them. One morning, as the group traveled through a rocky canyon, the cowboy stopped abruptly. He crouched down, tracing the ground with his finger. "Look here," he said. "See these tracks? Deer passed this way recently. We can follow them to find food." The women leaned closer, studying the impressions in the dirt. The older woman nodded, impressed by his skill. The younger woman, for the first time, felt a sense of excitement. Following the tracks, they discovered a small herd of deer grazing quietly. With the cowboy's guidance, they set up a simple trap and secured enough food for the next few days. Through these shared experiences, the women began to trust the cowboy more. They saw that his intentions were genuine, that he was patient and careful, and that he respected them as individuals rather than as outcasts. He never forced them to act beyond their comfort, but he encouraged them to try new things, praising small successes and teaching through example. The women realized that, for the first time since leaving their village, they were being treated with respect and dignity. Despite the growing bond, moments of fear and doubt still appeared. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains, the wind tearing through the canyon with surprising force. The women huddled together under a rocky overhang, shivering as rain and dust stung their faces. The younger woman clung to the older woman, whispering, "I can't do this. What if we never survive?" The older woman, though equally frightened, took a deep breath and spoke firmly. "We will survive. We've faced worse in our lives. Trust him and trust yourself." The cowboy moved swiftly, creating a makeshift shelter with blankets and rope, protecting them from the worst of the storm. When the storm passed, the women were exhausted but alive, and they began to understand the value of having someone experienced at their side. At night, the cowboy would share stories of the land, tales of distant towns, rivers, and mountains, and of people he had met along the way. He spoke not of grandeur or wealth, but of simple lessons learned from kindness, bravery, and hard work. The older woman listened intently, seeing parallels between his experiences and her own life. The younger woman often asked questions, eager to learn and understand the wider world. Through these conversations, the women began to feel less isolated. They realized that there was more to life than their village, that there were people who could care for them without judgment or fear. Gradually, the cowboy also began to learn about them. He asked about their lives in the village, their families, and the people they had loved. The women, still cautious, shared only what felt safe, but the act of speaking brought relief. For the first time in weeks, they felt heard, understood, and valued. They realized that this man, a stranger who had appeared at a moment of despair, had become a guide, protector, and friend. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the plains, The cowboy sat with the women near the fire. He spoke softly. "You are stronger than you realize. Life has taken much from you, but it has not taken your courage, your wisdom, or your heart. The world is harsh, yes, but it is also full of opportunity. You can choose what comes next." The women exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They had faced loss, exile, and fear, yet here they were, alive and learning to live again. Over time, small victories became frequent. The women learned to light fires, gather water efficiently, and even ride horses with confidence. The younger woman discovered a talent for tracking, while the older woman proved skilled at creating shelters and finding safe resting spots. They worked together, sharing laughter and small joys along the way, discovering that even in a harsh and unforgiving land, life could still hold moments of beauty and triumph. Through all of this, the bond between the cowboy and the women grew stronger. He never demanded loyalty, only effort and honesty, and he treated them as equals. The women began to feel a sense of security they had never known before. They realized that help could come from unexpected places, and that kindness and guidance were not always bound by tradition or blood. Yet, even as they grew stronger and more confident, shadows of doubt lingered. The women occasionally wondered whether they would ever be able to return to their old lives, whether they would ever be accepted again, or whether their future would always be uncertain. The cowboy reassured them gently. "The past has shaped you, yes, but it does not define you. The choices you make now will." As weeks passed, the journey continued. They crossed rolling hills, open plains, and rocky canyons. They faced minor dangers, snakes, sudden weather, and the ever-present challenge of finding food. But each obstacle strengthened their skills and their bond. The women began to feel hope for the first time in weeks, realizing that the world was larger than the confines of their village, and that there was a place in it for them if they were willing to work, trust, and survive. By the time they stopped one evening on a small rise overlooking a wide valley, the women felt different than they had when they were first expelled. They were no longer just widows cast out from their tribe. They were travelers, learners, and survivors. The cowboy's quiet presence and steady guidance had given them something they had never expected: a chance to rebuild, to discover strength they had forgotten, and to see life beyond the rules that had once bound them. The younger woman, looking out at the valley bathed in golden light, whispered to the older woman, Maybe we can find a new life. Maybe we can be happy again." The older woman nodded, feeling the truth of those words deep in her heart. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, they believed it was possible. With the cowboy at their side, they were no longer completely alone, and the future, though uncertain, held promise. The days grew longer and warmer as the three of them moved across the plains. The cowboy had become a steady presence in the women's lives, not only guiding them through the land but also teaching them how to survive on their own. Every morning, the women rose with the sun, learning to tie knots, gather firewood, and recognize tracks in the dirt. The older woman discovered that she had a natural eye for reading the landscape, noticing small details that others might miss: the pattern of plants near water, the direction of the wind, and the behavior of animals that hinted at danger. The younger woman, though less experienced, surprised herself by learning quickly and even developing a sense for predicting the weather. Each small success filled her with pride. At first, the cowboy taught with patience and quiet instruction, showing rather than telling. He would demonstrate how to set a simple trap for rabbits or how to purify water in a makeshift container. He never rushed them and never mocked mistakes, understanding that confidence came slowly, especially for those who had been cast out and forced to survive after years of living under rules and restrictions. Slowly, the women began to trust his methods, realizing that every skill he taught was valuable for keeping them alive and safe. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, they came across a narrow river cutting through a rocky gorge. The water moved swiftly, and the current glistened in the fading light. The cowboy stopped, pointing out stones that could be used as stepping points to cross safely. The older woman hesitated, her hands shaking slightly. Crossing the river without proper guidance could have been dangerous, but the cowboy stood at the edge, calm and reassuring, offering his hand as support. With cautious steps she followed, then helped the younger woman across. By the time they reached the other side, both felt a surge of accomplishment and a sense of independence they had never known in the village. As the nights grew colder, the cowboy showed them how to build more secure shelters. He taught them to weave grasses and branches into walls, to use rocks as windbreaks, and to build small fires that provided warmth without attracting attention from animals. The women worked together, laughing at clumsy attempts and celebrating small victories. The older woman was particularly good at weaving, and the younger woman discovered a talent for starting fires quickly and efficiently. Each night, as they sat around the flickering flames, they began to talk more openly, sharing memories of their lives before exile. The stories were bittersweet, filled with grief for the losses they had suffered, but also tinged with the warmth of family, traditions, and moments of joy. Through these shared experiences, the women and the cowboy began to understand each other. They shared meals of roasted meat or foraged vegetables, often discussing the subtle lessons learned from the land. The cowboy spoke of the importance of patience, observation, and respect for the environment. He explained how every plant and animal had a role to play, and how understanding these roles could mean the difference between life and death. The women listened intently, slowly realizing that survival was not just about strength, it was about wisdom, foresight, and the ability to adapt. The journey was not without its dangers. One morning, while traveling through a canyon, they encountered a rattlesnake coiled near their path. The younger woman froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The older woman grabbed her arm, whispering, "Step back slowly." The cowboy moved forward calmly, gently nudging the snake away with a long stick. "Nature can be unpredictable," he said quietly, "but fear alone cannot control us. Respect it, but don't let it stop you." That moment stayed with the women, a reminder that courage and careful thinking could overcome even sudden threats. Over time, they began to notice subtle changes in themselves. The younger woman's confidence grew. She no longer hesitated to try tasks that had once seemed impossible. She could ride a horse across uneven terrain, start a fire in damp conditions, and even help track small game. The older woman, once burdened by grief and shame, found new pride in her abilities and the wisdom she could offer. Both women began to see themselves not as victims of circumstance, but as capable individuals navigating a challenging world. One evening, as the group camped beneath a sky painted with stars, the cowboy shared a story of his past. He spoke of his family, of the hardships he had faced, and of the lessons learned from traveling across vast lands. He spoke of kindness from strangers, moments of unexpected courage, and the importance of never losing hope. The women listened closely, captivated by his calm storytelling, and the way he turned even the smallest experiences into lessons of resilience and strength. They realized that survival was not only about physical skills, it was also about the heart and mind. The women also began to teach the cowboy in small ways. The older woman showed him how to recognize certain plants that could be used for medicine, while the younger woman taught him a few traditional songs and stories from their village. Though brief, these exchanges reminded them that they were more than survivors. They were carriers of culture, knowledge, and memory. The cowboy respected their wisdom, understanding that each person brought unique strengths to the group. Days turned into weeks, and the women began to feel a sense of belonging, not to a village or tribe, but to a small group bound by trust and shared experience. The cowboy's quiet support, combined with the women's growing confidence, allowed them to see possibilities beyond mere survival. They began to discuss plans, ideas for the future, and the hope of reaching a place where they could start over. Each day brought small victories, finding safe water, spotting distant game, or navigating tricky terrain without error. These successes, though seemingly minor, built a sense of accomplishment and independence that the women had never known. Yet even as they grew stronger, the memories of their past lingered. They would speak occasionally of their village, of family members left behind, and of the rules that had cast them out. There was sadness, of course, but it was mixed with a determination not to be defined by those losses. The cowboy never dismissed their feelings. Instead, he encouraged reflection, helping them to channel grief into strength and learning. He reminded them that while the past shaped them, it did not have to limit them. One morning, as the sun rose over a distant ridge, the group encountered a small herd of wild horses. The younger woman gasped, captivated by their beauty and freedom. The cowboy smiled, seeing the wonder in her eyes. "One day," he said, "you'll ride with them too if you're ready." The women watched, imagining themselves galloping across the open plains, unafraid and free. For the first time, freedom felt tangible, not just an idea, but a possibility they could reach through courage, learning, and trust. As they continued their journey, the cowboy emphasized that survival was more than just physical skills. It was about thinking ahead, observing carefully, and making wise decisions. He taught the women how to ration supplies, plan routes, and anticipate challenges. He also encouraged them to trust their instincts, reminding them that their experiences and intuition were just as valuable as any knowledge he could share. Slowly, the women began to see themselves not as fragile outsiders, but as competent, resourceful individuals capable of navigating the world around them. Even in moments of rest, the lessons continued. Around the fire at night, they discussed the patterns of the stars, the changing seasons, and the ways in which animals adapted to survive. The women began to appreciate the natural world, understanding its rhythms and learning to read its signs. They also began to appreciate the cowboy's quiet wisdom, realizing that his guidance was not about control, but about empowerment. He had shown them that they could survive and even thrive if they learned to trust themselves and the world around them. By the end of the third week, the women were transformed. They could navigate the plains with confidence, find food and water independently, and handle emergencies calmly. Their bond with the cowboy was strong, built on mutual respect, trust, and shared experiences. They had learned not only to survive, but to live with courage and awareness. They were no longer just widows cast out from a village. They were travelers, learners, and friends who had discovered strength, independence, and hope in the face of adversity. The older woman, looking at the younger one, said one evening, "We are not the same people who left the village. We are stronger, wiser, and more capable." The younger woman nodded, smiling despite the fatigue. "And we are not alone anymore," she added. The cowboy, watching the exchange, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had guided them, yes, but they had also guided themselves, discovering inner strength they had never known. As the night settled over the plains, the three sat together by the fire, feeling the warmth not only from the flames but from the bond they had formed. The journey was far from over and challenges still lay ahead, but the women now faced them with confidence, courage, and the knowledge that they were no longer powerless. The world was wide, uncertain, and sometimes harsh, but it was also full of possibilities. For the first time, the women understood that survival was more than a struggle. It was a journey of discovery, growth, and trust. They had learned that even after loss, even after being cast out, it was possible to find guidance, friendship, and hope. And as they closed their eyes that night beneath the vast, starlit sky, they knew that the days ahead, though challenging, would be met with courage, wisdom, and resilience. The days on the plains had grown longer, the sun blazing in the sky and casting sharp shadows across the Open land. The two women, now more confident in their abilities, traveled steadily with the cowboy. They had learned to read the subtle signs of nature, the direction of the wind, the tracks of animals, the distant movement of clouds signaling an approaching storm. Despite this growing confidence, the memories of their past, of the village, their families, and the husbands they had lost, lingered quietly in their minds. Some nights these thoughts were nearly unbearable, filling the darkness with grief that seemed almost physical. One afternoon, as they rested beside a small grove of trees, the older woman's gaze drifted toward the distant hills. She thought about her children, who were still living within the village, protected by relatives. She wondered how they were faring, if they missed her, if they understood why she had been cast out. The younger woman, noticing the distant look in her companion's eyes, asked softly, "Do you ever think about going back?" The older woman shook her head slowly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but the rules will never forgive us. We would not be safe, and yet part of me longs to see my home once more." The cowboy listened quietly, understanding the weight of her words. He had seen grief before, had guided travelers through loss, and knew that while the land could teach survival, it could not erase memory. "The past shapes us," he said, "but it does not define the future. You carry it with you, yes, but it can guide you, not trap you. You have already survived more than most, and that strength is yours forever." His words were simple, but they carried truth and a quiet power that resonated deeply with both women. That evening, as they prepared their camp beneath a rising moon, the younger woman spoke of fear. "Sometimes I feel like I'm running away," she confessed. "If I face my past, maybe I'll find closure, but what if I fail? What if I cannot survive on my own?" The older woman placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We are not alone," she reminded her. "We have learned to survive, we have learned courage, and we have him." She nodded toward the cowboy who was securing their fire. "But most importantly, we have each other. Whatever comes, we face it together." The next morning, the journey continued. They passed through a narrow valley flanked by jagged cliffs, the wind whistling through the rocks in a haunting song. Suddenly, the younger woman stopped, noticing the subtle signs of movement ahead, a patch of disturbed dust, the glint of metal reflecting the sun. The cowboy squinted, then gestured for silence. Ahead, a small group of bandits appeared, moving quickly through the valley. They were armed, and though they seemed distracted, their presence posed a serious threat. The cowboy motioned for the women to stay low, whispering instructions. "Stay behind me, stay quiet, and follow my lead," he said. The women nodded, hearts pounding. Every step required careful calculation. The bandits were close enough that a wrong move could draw attention, but the cowboy's experience guided them through the rocks, keeping them hidden and safe. The older woman's hands trembled, but she focused on each step, drawing strength from her training and the presence of her companions. The younger woman, despite fear, followed closely, trusting in the cowboy's judgment and her own instincts. Once the danger had passed, the group found a small clearing and paused to rest. The women's hearts were still racing, but relief washed over them. "We did well," the cowboy said quietly. "You both followed instructions, stayed calm, and used what you've learned. That is how survival works, not luck, but preparation and focus." The women smiled faintly, realizing that even moments of danger could become lessons, each experience strengthening their resolve and confidence. Later that day, the women began to speak more openly about their lives before exile. They shared memories of family, childhood games, and traditions they had cherished. The older woman spoke of her children, of the joy she had felt teaching them songs and stories, and the pain of leaving them behind. The younger woman recalled her husband's laughter, the quiet evenings spent together, and the grief that followed his passing. The cowboy listened, offering empathy without judgment. Through sharing these stories, the women began to process their grief, recognizing that their pasts, though painful, could provide insight and strength for the future. One evening, as the group camped near a small, hidden spring, the older woman expressed a desire to return to the village, not to reclaim her old life, but to see her children one last time. The cowboy considered her words carefully. "It is dangerous," he said. "But if your heart tells you that it must be done, I will guide you. You will need caution, patience, and courage. Do you understand?" She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. The younger woman, sensing her companion's need for closure, agreed to accompany her. "We face it together," she said firmly. The following days were tense but focused. The cowboy led them carefully, choosing paths that avoided main trails, ensuring they remained unseen. Along the way, he continued to teach, showing how to move quietly, observe without being noticed, and read the land for both safety and opportunity. The women's confidence grew with each passing hour. They moved not as fearful exiles but as capable travelers, aware of dangers yet prepared to face them. As they approached the outskirts of the village, familiar sights brought a rush of memories, dusty paths, the distant sounds of life, and the faint aroma of familiar foods. The older woman's heart ached with longing, while the younger woman felt a nervous excitement she could barely contain. They remained hidden, observing the village from a safe distance. The elders' faces were, as they remembered, stern and unyielding, but the children's laughter, the sound of daily life, stirred a complex mixture of hope and sorrow. The cowboy suggested patience. "We wait until the right moment," he advised. "Rushing in could be dangerous. Observe, understand the patterns, and choose carefully how you proceed." They spent hours studying the village, noting who was present when routines occurred and how to move unnoticed. The women's skills, honed through weeks of travel, allowed them to remain calm, deliberate, and aware. Each movement was measured, each observation carefully considered. Finally, the moment came. The older woman slipped quietly through the outskirts of the village with the younger woman close behind, both guided by the cowboy from a distance. They approached the home of the older woman's children, careful to remain unseen by the elders. From a hidden vantage point, they watched the children playing, full of life and energy. Tears came to the older woman's eyes, but she smiled through them, feeling a sense of peace she had not known since leaving the village. Though she could not stay, seeing her children safe and happy offered closure and a sense of connection that had been absent for weeks. As they retreated from the village, the younger woman placed a hand on her companion's arm. "It's enough," she whispered. "We have seen them and they are safe. That is what matters." The older woman nodded, her heart heavy yet relieved. Together, they returned to the plains, guided by the cowboy, carrying with them the quiet satisfaction of having faced the past and found closure. The journey back was calmer but filled with reflection. The women realized that while the past could not be changed, it could inform the choices they made moving forward. They had faced danger, confronted loss, and experienced both fear and hope. And through it all, they had learned to trust themselves and each other, discovering inner strength that had been hidden beneath grief and uncertainty. One evening, as the sun set and painted the plains in shades of gold and red, the cowboy spoke softly. "You have grown stronger than you know. Life will always present challenges, but you now have the skills, courage, and wisdom to face them. The past is a guide, not a prison." The women looked at each other, recognizing the truth in his words. They had survived exile, learned to thrive in the wilderness, and faced the shadows of their past. That night, as they sat by the fire, the women felt a sense of hope that had been absent for so long. They had confronted fear, danger, and sorrow, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. The cowboy, watching the flames flicker, felt satisfaction in knowing that his guidance had helped them reclaim not only their strength, but also their sense of self. The journey was far from over, but the women had reached a pivotal moment. They had faced the hardest parts of their past and emerged with resilience, courage, and a renewed belief in the possibilities of the future. The plains stretched before them, vast and uncertain, but no longer terrifying. With each step, they discovered that life was not defined by the losses they had suffered, but by the choices they made, the strength they found, and the hope they carried forward. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden in the sunlight and dotted with small trees and distant hills. After weeks of travel, facing both dangers and moments of quiet beauty, the two women and the cowboy moved with a sense of purpose and confidence. The women had changed in ways they could hardly have imagined when they were first expelled from the village. They were stronger, braver, and more capable than ever, and the bond between them and the cowboy had grown into one of trust, respect, and quiet friendship. As they approached a small valley tucked between rolling hills, the cowboy spoke softly. "There is a settlement ahead. It's small, but it is safe. People there will not judge you for who you were or what happened in your past. You will have a place to start again." The women exchanged a glance, excitement and nervousness mingling in their expressions. The thought of a permanent home, a place where they could contribute and belong, was both thrilling and frightening. After so long on the road, with uncertainty as their constant companion, the idea of stability seemed almost unreal. Upon reaching the settlement, the group paused at the outskirts, observing quietly. Unlike the strict rules of their village, this place was filled with friendly faces, people who welcomed travelers with open hands and warm smiles. Children ran freely in the dirt streets, playing games without fear, and adults moved about their tasks with a sense of calm and cooperation. The women felt a mixture of relief and awe. For the first time in weeks, they saw a place where they could exist without fear of rejection. The cowboy guided them through the settlement, introducing them to a few of the residents along the way. There was an elderly woman who ran a small garden, a young blacksmith with skilled hands and a gentle demeanor, and a family who offered shelter to travelers. Everyone they met treated them with kindness and respect, asking no questions about the past unless the women wanted to share. The older woman felt tears prick her eyes as she realized that not all people were bound by harsh rules or judgment. This place, she understood, could become a true home. The younger woman was particularly drawn to the children playing near the center of the settlement. She watched their laughter, their innocence, and the freedom they enjoyed. She felt a pang of longing, remembering the children she had left behind in her village, but she also recognized that here, in this new place, there was a chance to create joy and belonging anew. The cowboy noticed her gaze and nodded reassuringly. "You can help make this place better. You can share your skills, your kindness, and your strength." His words gave her courage, and she realized that the past, though important, did not have to limit her future. Over the next few weeks, the women began to settle into their new surroundings. They learned the rhythms of the settlement, helping with daily tasks, gathering food, and assisting where needed. The older woman began to teach small lessons to the children, sharing her knowledge of plants, survival, and storytelling. She found joy in watching them learn and thrive, and she realized that her experiences, once a source of grief, could now be used to help others. The younger woman discovered a natural talent for crafting and assisting with tasks that required both patience and attention to detail. With each passing day, she felt more confident and capable, proud of the contributions she could make. The cowboy remained nearby, not as a master or guardian, but as a friend and mentor. He offered guidance when necessary, encouraged independence, and celebrated their successes. The women no longer needed him for survival, but they valued his presence as someone who had helped them navigate a harsh world, taught them essential skills, and shown them that trust and friendship could exist outside of fear and judgment. Their bond had become a quiet, steady foundation upon which the women could build new lives. As the settlement grew familiar, the women also faced moments of reflection. They often thought of their past village, of family members left behind, and of the husbands they had lost. The older woman sometimes felt a twinge of sadness, wishing she could see her children more often or hear their voices. The younger woman occasionally missed the routines and comforts of her former life. Yet, they both understood that dwelling on the past would not change it. Instead, they focused on what they could do now, the lives they could touch, and the hope they could nurture. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills and bathed the settlement in golden light, the women prepared to participate in a small gathering organized by the community. The elders of the settlement welcomed newcomers and encouraged them to share their skills, stories, or knowledge. The older woman spoke first, teaching a small group of children about the plants that grew nearby, their uses, and the importance of respecting nature. She told stories of her travels and the lessons she had learned, capturing the children's imaginations. The younger woman demonstrated how to craft simple tools and objects from everyday materials, showing patience and skill. Both women were met with applause and gratitude, and they felt a sense of pride and belonging that had been absent for so long. Evenings were spent around the fire, where the cowboy, the women, and other residents shared stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. The women often spoke of their journey, the hardships, the lessons, and the moments of hope. They realized that every step, every struggle, and every fear they had faced had led them to this place. They had survived not only the harsh land, but also the emotional weight of exile, grief, and uncertainty. Now, they could finally rest, knowing they had found a home where they were valued and respected. As the weeks turned into months, the women began to feel a deep sense of peace. The older woman continued to mentor the children, passing on wisdom and stories from her village and her travels. She realized that her life, once defined by loss, was now full of purpose and meaning. The younger woman, too, thrived, developing confidence and a sense of independence she had never known. She discovered new skills, made friends within the settlement, and felt the joy of being part of a community that welcomed her fully. The cowboy, seeing their transformation, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had offered guidance and protection when they needed it most, but the women had found their own strength, resilience, and courage. He knew that their journey was far from over, but he also knew that they were no longer defined by fear or past losses. They had discovered hope, independence, and the power of choice. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the women stood together, looking out over the hills beyond the settlement. "We made it," the older woman whispered. "We survived everything, and now we can live." The younger woman nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "We are not alone anymore, and we can choose our own path." The cowboy, standing beside them, smiled quietly, proud of the strength and resilience they had discovered in themselves. Life in the settlement continued, each day bringing new tasks, new lessons, and new joys. The women's past remained a part of them, but it no longer held power over their lives. They had faced exile, danger, and grief, and through courage, determination, and the guidance of a compassionate friend, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and capable of creating a life they could be proud of. In time, the women came to realize that their journey had taught them something far greater than survival. They had learned about hope, trust, friendship, and the importance of choice. They had discovered that even after loss, even after being cast out, it was possible to find belonging, purpose, and joy. The plains, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a land of opportunity, growth, and renewal. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, the women reflected on everything they had endured. They remembered the hardships of exile, the challenges of survival, and the moments of doubt that had tested their courage. And yet, they also remembered the kindness, the lessons, and the friendships that had guided them to this new life. They understood that the journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. They had discovered strength they never knew they had, and they had learned that the future, no matter how uncertain, was theirs to shape. With the cowboys' guidance and the support of their new community, the women looked forward to the days ahead with hope and determination. They had faced the harshness of the world, confronted the shadows of their past, and emerged resilient and empowered. Their lives, once defined by loss and exile, were now filled with possibility, connection, and the promise of new beginnings. And as the wind whispered softly through the trees and the plains stretched endlessly beyond the settlement, the women realized that they had truly found a home, not just in the valley but within themselves. They had discovered courage, independence, and the power of hope. And they knew that, no matter what challenges the future might hold, they were ready to face them with strength, wisdom, and a renewed sense of purpose.